The months after the battle with Amarok stretched on in the shelter like thick, sterile molasses. 6 cycles of the moon around the Earth, according to the calendar on the terminal. For me, time here had long lost its linearity, turning into a series of cycles. Physical training, combat simulations, medical tests, short periods of restless sleep, and waiting. Eternal dull waiting for the next order, the next hunt. The smell of the shelter ozone, hot server metal antiseptic had seeped under my skin, becoming a part of me, just like the silver sword that now rested in its special scabbard across my back. Our gear, designed specifically for Echo Squad operations, was adaptive and could withstand partial transformations, but full beast form still remained risky for the equipment. Echo Squad, me, Ripley, Jagger, and Cypher, had become a single organism. Training had honed our coordination to animal instinct. We moved as a pack, thought as a pack. Ripley, with her feline grace and lightning speed, was our eyes and our sting. Jagger, a mountain of muscle and fury, was our unbreakable shield and battering ram. Cypher, quiet and withdrawn, with his chilling ability to see what was hidden from others and penetrate minds, was our navigator in the world of shadows and lies. And I was the fangs and claws, the tip of the spear, the one who brought death on the blade of a silver sword. The connection between us wasn't just combat coordination. It was something deeper, primal. Psi-bonds, as Cross's scientists called them, allowed us to feel each other at a distance, anticipate actions, share pain and rage. It made us stronger, but also more vulnerable. The beast inside me hadn't quieted. It had simply become part of the landscape of my soul. I had learned to live with it, to channel its hunger, its fury. But humanity, it was thinning, like old parchment. Emotions became a luxury I couldn't afford. Doubt, fear, even compassion. All of it interfered, made me weaker. Only instincts, duty, and a strange, twisted attachment to my pack remained, to monsters like myself. Cross summoned us to the briefing room early in the morning. His face, as always, was chiseled from granite, his cold blue eyes expressing nothing but absolute control. But I caught a subtle shift in the air, the tension that precedes a pounce. "Gentlemen, ladies," his voice was flat, like a dead man's cardiogram. "The lull is over. New information has emerged requiring immediate action." On the large tactical screen behind him, a map flickered. This time, not the icy wastes of Canada, but sun-scorched, war-torn land, Afghanistan. A dot blinked in one of the most remote and inaccessible mountain regions, near a vast desert plain. An international archaeological expedition. Cross switched the image. Photos appeared. A group of smiling people in field gear against a backdrop of ancient ruins. Professor Armitage, a renowned specialist in pre-Islamic Central Asian history, and his team. 3 weeks ago, they reported a sensational find in the so-called Valley of Seven Winds. Apparently the entrance to a lost underground city, mentioned in ancient Persian and Arabic manuscripts. Legends link this place to a powerful jinn, Malik al-Ramli, the King of Sands, sealed here millennia ago. Cypher tilted his head almost imperceptibly, his dark eyes narrowing. I felt a ripple of interest, alarm, pass through our peace-eye bond. 5 days ago, contact with the expedition was lost, Cross continued. Attempts to re-establish contact have been unsuccessful. Simultaneously, our satellites detected a surge in anomalous energy activity in the area, similar to what we observed before the Hungry Cult incidents. According to our data, their local cell has activated. Presumably their goal is not the jinn itself, but an artifact, the jinn's heart, which, according to legends, grants control over the elements, and can amplify their rituals worldwide. He scanned us with a heavy gaze. Your mission: insert into the designated area. Establish contact with the local guide. Find traces of Professor Armitage's expedition. Infiltrate the underground complex. Neutralize the hungry operatives. Prevent the release of the jinn or the capture of the artifact. The rescue of the archaeologists is a secondary objective, but desirable, if it doesn't jeopardize the primary goal. Cross paused. Time is critical. Any delay could lead to catastrophic consequences. Questions? There were no questions. Only cold determination and the familiar itch in my fingertips where claws lay hidden beneath the skin. The beast inside me was fully awake. A new hunt, new blood, and this time, we went after it as a pack. The C-130 transport spat us out onto an improvised landing strip somewhere in the foothills of the Hindu Kush at dawn. Afghanistan's hot, dry air hit my face like a searing pan after the cool of the sealed bay. Dust, fine as flour, immediately clogged my nose and eyes. All around, as far as the eye could see, stretched a scorched, rocky desert, transitioning into jagged, barren mountains. The sky was mercilessly blue, the sun already beginning to blaze. An old, rattling land cruiser waited for us, and a man leaning against its dented side. Rahim, a Pashtun in his 60s with a face etched with deep wrinkles like the bed of a dried-up river, and eyes the color of faded indigo, shining with ancient wisdom and an equally ancient weariness. His gray beard was neatly trimmed, and he wore a traditional pakol hat. He nodded at us silently, his gaze lingering on me slightly longer than the others. He didn't know what we were, but he seemed to sense the aura emanating from us. Inhuman. Predatory. Colonel Cross warned me of your arrival. His English had a thick accent, but was perfectly understandable. I am Rahim. I will guide you to the Valley of Seven Winds. But beyond that, everyone is on their own. This place is cursed. The shadows of the past sleep restlessly there. The drive to the last known archaeologist camp took several hours. The land cruiser creaked and bounced over potholes, raising clouds of dust behind us. Rahim drove confidently, knowing every track, every stone. Along the way, he spoke, not so much to us, but more to himself, looking at the road fragments of local legends. About Malik al-Ramli, the King of Sands, a mighty jinn who ruled these lands before the coming of men. How ancient mages and warriors managed to imprison him in the heart of the mountain, but his curse remained, and the Valley of Seven Winds became a place where the boundary between worlds blurred, where the past came alive and shadows gained flesh. We found the archaeologist camp at the foot of a rock massif resembling a frozen wave. It had been ransacked. Tents were ripped to shreds, equipment smashed or carried off. Signs of struggle were everywhere. Spatters of dried blood on the sand, spent rifle casings, a broken shovel handle. But there were no bodies, and no trace of the archaeologists themselves. Only strange symbols drawn in blood or ochre on the stones, the symbols of the hungry cult. And also, tracks. Inhuman. Long, narrow, with deep grooves, as if from a reptile's claws or a giant bird. Sand demons, Rahim whispered, his face ashen. Servants of Malik. They took them. We moved on, towards the ruins of an ancient caravanserai which, according to Rahim, was the gateway to the jinn's underground realm. The road led through a narrow gorge, and here the landscape changed. There were signs of recent war, and not just recent. Around the next bend, we stumbled upon it, the rusty hulk of a BMP-1 infantry fighting vehicle with a severed track and a gaping hole in its turret. Nearby, remnants of barbed wire, sandbags faded with time, a scattering of 7.62 mm casings. An abandoned Soviet outpost. Shuravi, Rahim spat on the ground. They were here too, in the 80s. Tried to find something. Said they were looking for ancient power to defeat the Mujahideen. They dug, they blasted. But the mountain did not yield its secrets. Many of them never returned. They say the shadows took their souls. I looked at the faded red star on the side of the BMP and a cold déjà vu touched me. The mine in Appalachia, old government experiments. Attempts to use things that should not be disturbed. History repeated itself. Only the scenery and project names changed. People always reached for forbidden power, not understanding they were playing with a fire that could consume them. And we, Echo Squad, were a product of the same game. Improved, more deadly, but still the same. Weapons forged from the darkness. The ruins of the caravanserai stood over the desert like the skeleton of a prehistoric beast. Once, it had been a magnificent structure, an oasis of life on the Great Silk Road, where merchants, pilgrims, and warriors met. Now, only half-ruined sandstone walls, buried in sand, collapsed arches, and empty window frames remained. The wind howled through the ruins, wailing in the cracks of the stones like the lament of forgotten souls. Cypher froze at the entrance to the inner courtyard, his head slightly tilted, eyes closed. I felt a wave of tension transmit through our psi bond. Energy, very strong. His mental voice was quiet, almost a whisper. Ancient, pressing, as if the very earth here breathes and watches. He opened his eyes, alarm swirling within them. I see images, swirls of sand, eyes burning like coals, shadows gliding along the walls, long, clawed. They are waiting. We entered the inner courtyard. It was vast. Hundreds of camels and horses could have once been accommodated here. Now, however, it was strewn with rubble, sand, and debris. In the center, a half-ruined fountain remained, long since dry. The silence was oppressive, broken only by the crunch of sand under our boots and the distant howl of the wind. An ambush. I felt it a split second before everything began. A barely perceptible change in the air's scent, a mixture of sweat, gun oil, and fanatic madness. A short, sharp cry in Pashto from somewhere above, from a half-ruined gallery. And then, fire. A dozen cultists burst from behind cover, from behind collapsed walls, from dark doorways. They were armed diversely. Old Kalashnikovs, hunting rifles, long curved knives, peshkovs. Their clothes were dirty, their faces gaunt, but their eyes burned with the mad fire of belief. They didn't look like professional soldiers, but their fanaticism made them dangerous, unpredictable. "Contact!" Jagger roared, his voice like a bear's. He took the first hit. His transformed body, covered in black fur, withstood several bullets before he crashed into a group of cultists, scattering them like bowling pins. Ripley transformed into flashing silver lightning, her claws and fangs a blur of incredible speed, leaving screams of pain and splatterings of blood in her wake. She moved among the enemies like a dancer of death, her attacks precise and deadly. Cypher stayed back slightly, his eyes rapidly scanning the battlefield. 2 on the gallery right, snipers. 3 coming in from the rear, through the arch. His mental commands were sharp, anticipating events. He didn't engage in close combat himself, but his tactical vision was invaluable. I drew my silver sword. It hummed low in my hand as if welcoming the fight. I lunged at the group of cultists trying to flank Jagger. My sword sang as it cut the air, leaving smoking wounds on the bodies of the enemies. The silver burned them, causing not only physical pain, but also some mystical terror. Their attacks were furious but chaotic. They couldn't withstand our coordination, our inhuman strength and speed. The fight was short, brutal, and bloody. Within minutes, it was over. The caravanserai courtyard was strewn with the bodies of the cultists. The air was heavy with the scent of gunpowder, blood, and the ozone emanating from my sword. "Clear," Ripley reported, licking blood from her claws. "These were just pawns." We began searching the bodies. On one of the cultists, seemingly the leader, Cypher found a crudely drawn map of the ruins. It was marked with a red circle in one of the far corners of the inner courtyard, with a note in Pashto: "Gateway to the realm of Moloch." We headed there. In the indicated spot, under a collapsed section of the wall, we found it. A heavy stone hatch, almost completely hidden by sand and debris. Ancient symbols, similar to those Rahim had shown us on old amulets, were carved into its surface. This was the entrance. Jagger, roaring with effort, shifted the heavy slab. A blast of hot, stale air rushed out of the opening. It smelled of the dust of ages, sulfur, and something else. Sweetish, spicy, intoxicating. A scent I was beginning to recognize. The scent of the jinn. And from the depths came a barely audible, low thrum, as if a giant ancient heart was beating underground. The descent into Malik al-Ramli's underground realm was like plunging into the maw of an ancient sleeping monster. A narrow staircase carved into the rock led down into a darkness that seemed alive, breathing. The air became drier, hotter, saturated with the smell of sulfur, dust, and those same intoxicating perfumes that made my head slightly spin. Our tactical flashlights picked out walls covered in intricate carvings from the gloom. These weren't just patterns. These were bas-reliefs depicting scenes from the life, or non-life, of jinns. Giant figures commanding the elements, battling mythical monsters, receiving gifts from kneeling humans, and everywhere, the image of a huge, shapeless creature, worshipped by both men and jinns. Apparently, Malik al-Ramli himself, or what came before him. The silence was oppressive, broken only by our footsteps and the steady drip of water somewhere ahead. Cypher went first, his heightened senses scanning every inch of the space. "Careful," his mental voice echoed in our heads. "This place, it's protected, not just physically." His words were confirmed almost immediately. As soon as we rounded the first bend, several bronze darts, coated in a dark, viscous substance, shot out from the wall with a sharp click. Ripley, with her lightning-fast reflexes, dodged and batted several of them away in flight. Jagger took 2 darts on his transformed, thickly furred arm. They bounced off, leaving only scratches that immediately began to heal. The poison, if there was any, had no effect on us. And then more. Floor tiles that gave way underfoot, opening gaping pits at the bottom of which sharp stakes were visible. Stone blocks raining down from the ceiling. Walls that shifted, trying to crush us. This wasn't just a tunnel. It was a deadly labyrinth, created to stop anyone who dared disturb the peace of the King of Sands. Thanks to Cypher, who somehow felt the traps moments before they triggered, and Jagger's might, who simply blasted his way through where possible, we pushed forward. Slowly but inexorably. The tunnel led us into a larger chamber lit by a dim, pulsating light emanating from strange crystals embedded in the walls. And here, for the first time, we faced them. The true guardians of this place. They appeared out of nowhere. The sand, lying in a thick layer on the floor, suddenly swirled up, spun into vortices and took shape. A dozen humanoid figures woven from sand and dust, with burning red points for eyes. Sand ghouls. They moved silently, their bodies constantly changing shape, sometimes solidifying, sometimes dissolving into a cloud of sand. "They're intangible. Bullets are useless," Cypher yelled mentally as the first bursts from Ripley's and Jagger's rifles. They preferred firearms against multiple targets, conserving strength for transformation, passed through the ghouls without harming them. The ghouls attacked, extending their sandy hands, trying to grab us, drag us under the layer of sand which seemed bottomless on the chamber floor. One lunged at Ripley, but she twisted away like a snake, slipped past, and struck with her claws. The sand figure froze for a moment, then crumbled, but immediately began to reassemble. I stepped forward, my silver sword already ready. The professor's diary spoke of cold iron and silver. It seemed here, in the realm of sands, silver possessed a unique, destructive power. I struck at the nearest ghoul. The blade passed through the sand body with a light hiss, and something strange happened. The sand around the wound hardened for a moment, became brittle like glass, and then crumbled into dark, lifeless dust. The ghoul howled. The sound was like the wind in the desert, and recoiled. "Silver, it wounds them but doesn't kill them completely," I transmitted via the psi-link. A strange, surreal battle began. We couldn't kill them, but we could temporarily disable them, force them to crumble. Jagger, transformed, struck them with his massive fists, creating shock waves that scattered the sand figures. Ripley, using her speed, delivered precise blows with her claws, preventing them from getting close. Cypher, staying back, directed our attacks, pointing out the ghouls trying to flank us or materialize behind us. And I was the center of this sandstorm. My silver sword danced, destroying and redestroying the fluid bodies of the Guardians. We fought our way through the chamber, leaving behind only piles of dark, motionless ash which, I was sure, would soon come back to life. But there was no rest. Ahead, in the next tunnel, a new nightmare awaited us. As soon as we passed the chamber with the sand ghouls, the temperature began to rise sharply. The walls of the tunnel became hot to the touch, the air filled with the smell of burning and molten rock. A reddish glow was visible ahead. We entered a new, even larger cavern, but this one was different. It resembled the throat of a volcano. Tongues of flame erupted from cracks in the floor and walls, and lava flowed slowly through channels, illuminating the space with uneven, infernal light. The heat was unbearable even for our lycanthrope bodies. "What the hell?" Jagger growled, his black fur steaming from the heat. "Careful." Cypher's mental voice was strained. "I feel them. Many. Fast. Hot." And they appeared. First as small, flickering sparks on the walls and ceiling. Then these sparks began to grow, taking shape. Fire salamanders. Creatures the size of a large lizard, but composed entirely of living, pulsating flame. Their eyes, two glowing coals, burned with malice. They moved with incredible speed, scurrying across the hot rocks, leaping over streams of lava. The first attack was sudden. A dozen salamanders dropped from the ceiling, spitting globes of fire. We barely managed to scatter. The fireballs exploded, hitting the stones, leaving behind melted scorch marks. One grazed Ripley's shoulder. She shrieked in pain, her silver fur instantly charred at the impact point. Regeneration kicked in immediately, but the burn was severe. "They're spitting fire and exploding on contact," I yelled, batting away a fireball flying at me with my sword. The silver blade cut through the flame, but the heat seared my hand. An infernal dance began. Salamanders were everywhere. They crawled out of cracks, fell from above, attacked from all sides. There were too many to simply fight them off. We tried shooting. Jagger and Ripley switched back to firearms, but bullets either passed through their fiery bodies or only momentarily scattered the flames, which immediately reassembled. Source: They need a source of fire for regeneration." Cypher's thought was like a flash of lightning. He pointed to the torches burning in wall niches, apparently left by the cultists, and to small geysers of flame erupting from cracks. "Put out the fire! Cut off their fuel!" This changed the tactics. We split up. Jagger, using his massive body for cover, began methodically stomping out and burying the smaller flame sources with rocks. Ripley, using her speed, knocked down the torches. Cypher and I, who to my surprise showed decent aim by throwing rocks, focused on the salamanders themselves. My silver sword again proved its effectiveness. It didn't just cut through the flame, it extinguished it. Each strike left behind a trail of black smoke, and the salamander, struck by silver, turned into a charred, smoking ember for a few seconds before flaring up again from a nearby fire source. But if the source was extinguished, it crumbled to ash. The fight was exhausting. The heat, the constant attacks, the need to watch not only the enemies but also the sources of fire. Several times we were a hair's breadth from death. Jagger suffered severe burns trying to bury a large flame geyser. Ripley narrowly dodged the self-detonation of an entire group of salamanders. My own fur was scorched in several places, and the smell of burnt hair mixed with the sulfur and char. Finally, the last salamander was destroyed. We stood in the middle of the smoking, heated cavern, breathing heavily. The silence, broken only by the hiss of cooling lava, seemed deafening. "We need to move on," I said, wiping sweat from my brow. "We're close. I can feel it." In one of the extinguished torch holders, I noticed something. A small, charred object. It was the leather binding of a diary. I carefully took it out. Most of the pages were burned, but a few in the middle survived. Written in shaky handwriting, clearly in haste, were notes in English. The diary of Professor Armitage or one of his colleagues. Cultists. They're everywhere. Took Dr. Evans and Allie. Ritual. Talking about the Jinn's heart. Artifact of incredible power. Malik al-Ramli. They want to control him. Or free him. Madmen. The Jinn sleeps, but its power seeps out. Sand creatures. Fire spirits. We're trapped. The path to the temple traps. Light. They fear pure light. And cold iron. Silver. Our only salvation, if it exists. The entry broke off. Pure light. Cold iron. Silver. The information was sparse but valuable, especially about the light. Perhaps it was the key to defeating the Jinn itself, if we could reach it. The chamber with the fire salamanders turned out to be an antechamber. A narrow, melted passage we discovered beyond the collapse led us to a kind of balcony carved into the rock. And what we saw below made even us, beings accustomed to nightmares, pause in astonishment. Below us, in a gigantic underground cavern lit by the uneven, pulsating light from massive crystals embedded in the walls and ceiling, lay the lost city. Not just ruins, but an entire city carved from stone with streets, squares, multi-story structures resembling ziggurats or stepped pyramids. The architecture was alien, unlike anything I had ever seen, a mix of Middle Eastern, Indian, and utterly unearthly motifs. Everything was covered in a thick layer of dust, but preserved surprisingly well, as if time had stopped here millennia ago. In the center of the city, on a raised platform, was a huge temple or palace, from which that powerful energy radiation which we felt was emanating. "Incredible," Ripley whispered, her silver eyes wide. "It actually exists." "And it's inhabited," Cypher added, pointing down. "Look." We looked closely. Shadows moved along the streets of the lost city. Small, barely discernible at this distance, but there were many of them. cultists, and not just them. In the air, under the high vault of the cavern, circled they air sylphs, or desert shadows as the locals called them. Semi-transparent, grayish figures with wide, webbed wings, like those of bats, but sharp as glass. Their movements were fluid, silent, predatory. They patrolled the airspace above the city. Looks like the main entrance to this spelunker's paradise is guarded better than Fort Knox. Jagger growled, flexing his powerful shoulders. We needed to descend and reach the central temple. On the balcony, we found the remnants of a rope ladder apparently left by the archaeologists or cultists. It looked unstable, but there was no other way. The descent was tense. The ladder creaked and swayed, threatening to break at any moment. Below, in the city streets, we tried to stay in the shadows, avoiding open spaces. Sylphs circled overhead, their sharp gazes seemingly piercing every dark corner. Several times we had to freeze for long minutes when one of the shadows flew too close. The city was dead, but not empty. We saw signs of recent cult activity, fires, scattered equipment, fresh, hungry symbols on the walls of ancient buildings, and also signs of struggle. Bloodstains, casings, broken weapons. The archaeologists had tried to resist. New clashes with cultists were inevitable. They attacked from ambushes, from dark alleys, from the windows of abandoned houses. But they were different now. Proximity to the Jinn's power source, to its artifact, was changing them. Some of them possessed rudimentary magical abilities. They could hurl a glob of sand at us that stung the eyes or create a small burst of flame. Their fanaticism bordered on madness. They fought to the last, even when severely wounded. Echo Squad operated like a well-oiled death machine. Ripley, with her speed, was elusive, appearing out of nowhere, striking and disappearing. Jagger was our armor and ram, breaking through barricades, throwing enemies back, taking their attacks head-on. Cypher, our brain, coordinated our actions, warned of dangers, found weak points in the enemy's defense. As for me, with my silver sword, I was the tip of the spear, cutting a path through the ranks of fanatics. The sword sang in my hands as if it relished this battle, this hunt. But the biggest problem was the air sylphs. They attacked from above, diving silently, their glass-like claws and wings leaving deep, bleeding wounds. Hitting them was incredibly difficult. Their semi-transparent bodies blended with the dim light of the crystals, their movements fast and unpredictable. Several times they nearly knocked Ripley out of the air when she made her acrobatic jumps. Jagger tried to reach them, throwing pieces of rock, but without success. Their eyes, Cypher's mental shout was almost painful. Their eyes are the only vulnerable point, and they fear bright light. That was the clue. I remembered the archaeologist's diary. Pure light. We didn't have floodlights, but Jagger had several high-intensity signal flares attached to his tactical vest. "Jagger, flares! Up!" I yelled. He understood without words. Grabbing a flare, he pulled the pin and hurled it high towards the cavern's vault. The flare exploded in a blinding flash of magnesium fire, momentarily bathing the entire underground city in a bright, almost sunlight-like glow. The sylphs shrieked. The sound was like scraping glass, and darted wildly, blinded. Some crashed into walls, others tried to hide in shadows. In that moment, they were vulnerable. Ripley, using her incredible leaping ability, brought them down from the air, her claws finding their glowing eyes. I also managed to get several, my sword easily passing through their ethereal bodies while they were disoriented. Jagger and Cypher, despite being blinded, managed to finish off several more before they could regain coordination. When the flare's effect ended and the cavern plunged back into twilight, most of the sylphs were destroyed or had fled. The path to the central temple was open, but I felt the worst was waiting for us there. The central temple of the lost city loomed over the other structures like a giant black fang biting into the cavern's vault. Its walls were covered in bas-reliefs depicting scenes of sacrifice and worship of Malik al-Ramli. From the massive, slightly ajar bronze gates emanated that same pulsating light and thrum we had felt throughout our journey. All the power of this cursed place was concentrated here. We burst inside, a vast, pillared hall. In the center, on a raised platform, stood the altar. Not just a stone, it was a gigantic, perfectly polished black obsidian crystal, the size of a small truck. It pulsed with crimson light from within, and waves of heat and raw, primordial energy emanated from it. This was the Jinn's heart, the artifact the hungry sought. A group of cultists stood by the altar, no more than a dozen, but they were different from those we had encountered before. Their clothes were richer, embroidered with gold and strange symbols. Their faces were hidden behind ritual masks of gold and bone. In their hands they held not ordinary weapons, but curved ritual daggers and scepters, the tops of which glowed with the same crimson energy as the altar. This was the cult elite, the priests. They were led by him, the high priest. A tall, thin figure in a robe of black silk embroidered with golden scorpions. His face was concealed by a mask depicting a distorted, fanged jinn face with burning rubies for eyes. In one hand he held a long, curved staff of black wood, topped with a pulsating crystal identical to the one on the altar. An aura of ancient, evil power emanated from him. They were performing a ritual. Their voices merged into a monotonous, guttural chant. The energy of the altar surged. The crimson light grew brighter, the thrum louder. They were clearly in the final stage. And then we saw them. The archaeologists, 3 of them. Professor Armitage, a gray-haired, emaciated old man, and 2 of his assistants, a man and a woman, both young, barely able to stand. They were chained to stone columns on either side of the altar. Their eyes were wide with terror. They weren't just hostages. They were part of the ritual. Their life force was being drained, feeding the altar and the priest. And, "Stop them! Don't let them finish the ritual!" Cypher's mental command was sharp as a whip crack. We charged. The priests didn't expect us so soon. But their reaction was instantaneous. The high priest raised his staff and a wave of searing sand struck towards us, blinding and burning. The other priests thrust their scepters forward, creating energy shields or hurling globs of dark energy at us that exploded on contact. The hardest battle we had ever faced began. These priests weren't just fanatics. They wielded magic, elemental but deadly. Sand vortices swirled through the hall, fireballs flew from all directions, illusory shadows tried to disorient us. Jagger roared with fury, his massive body taking the blows meant for others. He broke through energy shields with his monstrous strength. But each breach cost him deep burns and wounds. Ripley, as always, was the embodiment of speed. Darting among the priests, her claws and fangs finding gaps in their defenses. But she also took hits. One priest managed to trap her in a tangle of animated shadows, and she barely escaped, leaving behind tufts of silver fur. Cypher focused on the high priest. He tried to break through his mental defenses, disrupt his concentration, weaken his connection to the altar. It was an invisible battle of wills, and I felt Cypher pushing himself to the limit, his body trembling with strain, and I cut my way towards the altar. My silver sword was the only thing that could effectively counter their magic. It sliced through sand vortices, extinguished fireballs, shattered dark energy globs. Every priest I killed weakened the overall ritual strength, but the high priest seemed to draw energy directly from the altar, and his power did not wane. I watched as Professor Armitage and his assistants weakened before my eyes. Their life force drained away like water through fingers. I had to hurry. Breaking through the last defenders, I found myself face to face with the high priest. He was a head taller than me. His ruby eyes behind the mask burned with hatred and triumph. "You are too late, spawn of darkness." His voice was scratchy like sand. "Malik al-Ramli will awaken, and you will be the first meal for his wrath." He raised his staff, and the altar itself flared with a new, monstrous power. The high priest aimed his staff at me, and a concentrated beam of crimson energy shot from the crystal at its tip. I barely managed to raise my sword to deflect the blow. Silver met dark magic, a shower of sparks, a deafening crack, and I was thrown several feet back. The hand holding the sword was numb from the impact, and a wave of searing pain ran through my body. This priest was an order of magnitude stronger than the others. Jagger, seeing this, roared and threw himself with renewed force at the group of remaining priests covering their leader. Ripley, recovering from the shadow attack, joined him, her movements becoming even faster, even more furious. Cypher, taking advantage of the high priest's focus on me, intensified his mental assault. I saw the priest stagger for a moment, clutching his head under the mask. This was my chance. Ignoring the pain, I scrambled up and lunged at him again. He tried to block my attack with his staff, but I was faster. My sword arced, cutting off the tip of his staff. The crystal fell to the floor with a dull thud and shattered into small fragments. The high priest screamed. The scream was full of rage and despair. He threw aside the now useless staff and drew a long, jagged ritual dagger from his belt. He lunged at me like a wounded animal. But without magic, he was nothing. A few quick feints, a sword thrust, and he collapsed to the floor, his eyes behind the mask staring up at the ceiling in surprise. At that very moment, as the high priest fell, the altar, the Jinn's heart, flared with a new monstrous force. The crimson light became unbearably bright. The thrum escalated into a deafening roar. The stone slabs beneath our feet trembled, rocks rained down from the ceiling. The archaeologists, chained to the columns, screamed in terror. "The ritual! It's not stopped! It's out of control!" Cypher's mental voice was full of alarm. "The artifact's energy is being unleashed!" The black obsidian crystal of the altar began to crack. Streams of smoke, sand, and fire erupted from the fissures. The air filled with the smell of ozone, sulfur, and something ancient, unearthly. And then the crystal exploded. A blinding flash of light, and we were all thrown across the hall like leaves in a storm. I hit a column and lost consciousness for a moment. When I came to, the hall was unrecognizable. Part of the ceiling had collapsed. The columns cracked. In the center, where the altar had been, a gigantic vortex of sand, smoke, and fire now swirled, and from this vortex, a figure began to form. Malik al-Ramli, the King of Sands, the Jinn. He was not as I had imagined, not a humanoid figure in a turban. This was something else. Massive, perhaps 30 feet tall, his body woven from the elements. The lower part, a swirling sandstorm, the torso and arms of dense, red-hot sand through which tongues of flame flickered. The head was indistinct, constantly shifting in shape. But I saw two enormous, burning ruby eyes, filled with primal fury and millennia of hunger. He had no legs. He hovered above the ground on his sandy vortex. Instead of hands, two powerful appendages ending not in fingers, but in razor-sharp sand blades. "Freedom!" His voice was not a sound, but rather a vibration that passed through us, making our insides clench with terror. It was the roar of the desert, the howl of a hurricane, the rumble of an earthquake. The djinn looked around, his ruby eyes settling on us. 4 lycanthropes, struggling to get up from the floor, and then on the chained archaeologists. "Food!" His voice vibration boomed again. He swung one of his sandy blade arms, and it shot towards Professor Armitage. I saw the old man close his eyes, awaiting death. Jagger roared and lunged to intercept the sand blade. He took the blow. A horrifying screech echoed sand and stone against transformed flesh and bone. Jagger was thrown against the wall, crashing heavily, leaving a bloody trail on the floor, but he saved the professor. "Jagger!" Ripley's cry was full of fury. She darted towards the djinn, her claws flashing. But Malik al-Ramli was too fast. He created a sand vortex around himself that threw Ripley aside like a feather. "He's too strong. His form is unstable, but he's drawing energy from everywhere." Cypher's mental voice trembled with strain. He was trying to find a weakness, but the djinn's magic was too chaotic, too ancient. The djinn unleashed all its fury on us. Fireballs the size of boulders rained down from the ceiling, which it was setting ablaze itself. Sand blades slashed the air, forcing us to constantly dodge. The floor beneath our feet turned into quicksand, threatening to swallow us. Illusions. Suddenly I saw not the djinn before me, but Cross aiming a pistol at me. Then, my mother's face full of tears. I shook my head, casting off the delusion. The djinn was playing with us, trying to break our spirit. "Hold on, don't fall for the illusions!" I yelled, my voice cutting through the roar of the elements. I lunged at the djinn, my silver sword ready. "Strike!" The blade passed through its sandy body, leaving a smoking furrow. The djinn howled. This time there was pain in its voice. Silver. It still worked. But the wound immediately healed with new sand. "It regenerates too fast," Ripley groaned, getting back on her feet. Her silver fur was scorched, a deep wound bleeding on her side. We fought like the doomed. This wasn't a fight. It was a dance with death, with a raging element. Ripley, using her incredible speed, distracted the djinn, forcing it to spend energy chasing her, drawing its attacks away from the wounded Jagger and the archaeologists. Jagger, overcoming the pain, got up and re-entered the fray. His blows aimed not so much at inflicting damage as at throwing the djinn off balance, creating an opening for me. Cypher, pale as a sheet, focused on finding weaknesses. He darted around the hall, dodging attacks, his eyes closed, completely immersed in a mental confrontation with the ancient mind. And I was the tip of the spear. Again and again, I charged at Malik al-Ramli, my silver sword leaving new wounds on his body. But he was like a hydra. For every wound, 2 new ones immediately appeared. His fury grew, his attacks became more destructive. The temple was collapsing around us. Huge stone blocks fell from the ceiling. One nearly crushed Professor Armitage, but Cypher, opening his eyes for a moment, telekinetically pushed the boulder aside. "Its heart!" Suddenly Cypher's clear, sharp voice echoed in my head. He was on his knees, blood trickling from his nose and ears, but his eyes burned with triumph. "I see it, not a physical heart. A core of pure energy, the kernel of its essence. It's hidden deep within its sandy torso. But it's there. It's its anchor in this world. Destroy it, and it will crumble." Cypher's instruction was like a ray of light in the darkness. The djinn's heart. The core of its essence. But how to reach it? Malik al-Ramli seemed to sense that we had found its vulnerability. His attacks became even more ferocious, even more chaotic. He turned into a veritable tornado of sand, fire, and rubble, filling almost the entire hall. Jagger was at his limit. His regeneration couldn't keep up with the constant burns and wounds. He was breathing heavily, his black fur covered in blood and soot. But he didn't give up. Again and again he threw himself at the djinn, trying to push it back to give us some respite. Ripley, despite her wounds, continued her deadly dance around the giant. She was like silver mercury, fast, elusive, but every strike was aimed. Every attack weakened the djinn's sandy armor, briefly exposing its internal structure. Although the temperature around the djinn reached monstrous levels, directly within the sand vortex near its head, the heat was less intense, allowing Ripley to operate there, albeit with difficulty. Cypher, after his mental breakthrough, was nearly unconscious. He lay by the wall, his body trembling with a fine tremor. But with his last strength, he maintained the psi link, transmitting images, sensations, pointing out the slightest changes in the djinn's behavior, the moments when its defense weakened. Now, Aiden. Its energy is fluctuating. It's reshaping. In the center, the vortex. There. Cypher's mental whisper was barely audible. I saw it. For a moment, the djinn's sandy torso seemed to part, and in the very center, within the heart of the raging vortex, I saw it. A pulsating mass of blinding white energy, the size of a human head. That was it. The djinn's heart. Its core. But reaching it was practically impossible. The djinn protected it with a wall of fire and flying rocks. Any attempt to approach would be suicide. And then Ripley made her move. With a piercing battle cry that was a mix of a woman's scream and an animal's roar, she launched herself not at the djinn itself, but upward, onto one of the half-ruined columns hanging over it. She scrambled up it with incredible speed, dodging fireballs, and pushing off from the top, jumped. Right onto the djinn's head. Her claws and fangs dug into its ethereal head, making it roar with fury and surprise. It tried to shake her off, its sandy blade arms flashing around, but Ripley clung on with a death grip, her silver fur sparking from the proximity to the fiery energy. But she did not relent. She created that chance for me, a diversion at the cost of her own life. "Jagger, toss me!" I yelled, and my voice was lost in the djinn's roar and the crash of the collapsing temple. But Jagger understood. Despite his wounds, he gathered his last strength. He ran up to me, crouched, cupping his massive hands. I jumped into them, and he threw me upward, like a cannonball, straight into the heart of the storm, towards the djinn's heart. The flight was short, but it felt like an eternity. I flew through the vortex of sand, fire, and rubble, past the furiously roaring head of the djinn, on which Ripley still clung, showering it with blows. I saw her eyes. There was no fear in them, only fury and determination. She was buying me precious seconds. I raised my silver sword. It thrummed in my hands again. Its cold glow grew brighter, as if sensing the proximity of its target. I saw the pulsating white core before me, the djinn's heart, unprotected, vulnerable for one brief moment. And I struck. The sword entered the energy core with a piercing, high-pitched sound, like the ringing of shattered crystal. I felt a monstrous wave of energy pass through the blade, searing my hands even through the fur. But I didn't let go. I put all my strength into that strike. All the lycanthrope's rage. All of Aiden Barclay's will. Malik al-Ramli froze. His roar died in mid-utterance. The sand vortex around his core began to slow. The fire in its body dimmed. The boulder-sized ruby eyes stared at me with an expression of surprise, pain, or relief. And then it began to disintegrate, not like the ice wolf, not into snow and ice. Its body of sand and fire lost shape, crumbled, turning into ordinary lifeless sand. The fire went out, leaving only the smell of char. The sandy blade arms turned to dust. The The giant figure of the djinn settled, shrank, vanished before my eyes. A final, quiet sigh echoed, or was it just the wind in the ruins? And Malik al-Ramli was gone. On the spot where the element had just raged, only a huge crater in the floor remained, filled with cooling sand and a few smoldering embers. And also, a small, dimly glowing shard of black obsidian, all that remained of the djinn's heart. I landed heavily on the floor, barely keeping my balance. The sword fell from my weakened hand. My whole body ached. Regeneration worked at its limit, but I was alive. We were alive. Ripley jumped down from where the djinn's head had just been. Her fur was badly scorched, she was limping, but a predatory grin played on her muzzle. Jagger, leaning against a wall, slowly got up. He was covered in burns and wounds, but his powerful figure still radiated strength. Cypher lay motionless, but I felt through the CI link. He was alive, just utterly exhausted. We did it. We stopped the King of Sands. The silence that fell after the djinn's disintegration was almost deafening. Only the crackling of cooling stones, the creak of settling ruins, and our heavy, ragged breathing. The temple hall was almost completely destroyed. The first rays of the rising sun broke through the breaches in the ceiling, illuminating a scene of apocalyptic ruin. I walked over to the spot where Malik al-Ramli had vanished. At the bottom of the crater, amidst the cooling sand, lay it, a small shard of black obsidian, the size of a fist. It was warm to the touch and pulsed faintly, but its sinister energy had almost completely faded. I picked it up. The djinn's heart, or what remained of it. An important trophy, and perhaps a key to understanding the nature of these creatures. I placed it in a small lead-silver container from our gear kit, standard precaution for unknown artifacts. Ripley came up to me, limping. "Looks like we crashed the Hungry's party," she chuckled, but weariness was in her voice. Jagger, shaking off dust and soot, surveyed the ruined hall. "Good job, Pack. But it's time to get out of here before this whole thing collapses on us completely." The archaeologists. I remembered them. We found them where we left them, chained to the half-ruined columns. They were unconscious, but alive. Professor Armitage seemed to be in the worst condition. We freed them from the chains. Ripley and Jagger, despite their wounds, hoisted them onto their shoulders. I had to carry Cypher. He was too weak to walk on his own. The exit from the catacombs to the surface was long and arduous. Many passages had collapsed after the battle with the djinn. We had to find detours, break through rubble. But the rising sun we saw upon finally emerging from the suffocating darkness of the underground was the best reward. Rahim was waiting for us. Contrary to his promise to leave, the old Pashtun couldn't abandon the mad foreigners and set up camp near the ruins, praying and waiting. He looked at us silently, 4 beings covered in blood, soot, and dust, carrying the wounded and saved. There was no fear in his old eyes, only deep, silent respect. He asked nothing. He understood everything. The SOCOM extraction team arrived an hour later, raising clouds of dust with their Chinooks. They transported us to the nearest major airbase, where we transferred to a heavy military transport bound for the States. The archaeologists and the severely wounded Jagger, his burns were too serious even for our regeneration, were immediately sent to the medical bay. Ripley, Cypher, and I were also examined, our wounds treated. But the main scars, those on the soul, remained. The military transport aircraft carried us back to the shelter, leaving behind the sun-scorched mountains and deserts of Afghanistan. I looked out the porthole at the receding land where we had just battled an ancient horror. Another battle won, another monster defeated. But at what cost? And how long would this calm last? Ripley sat across from me, her eyes closed, but I knew she wasn't sleeping. Her silver fur was still scorched in several places. Cypher lay on a cot, his breathing steady, but he was pale and weak. The CI battle with the Jinn had cost him too much. Silence hung between us. Not awkward, but understanding. We had been through hell together. We had covered each other. We were a pack. And this feeling, the feeling of belonging, of combat brotherhood, was new to me and frightening, because it made me more vulnerable. It returned a part of the humanity I had tried so hard to bury. Cross contacted us when we were on approach to Nevada. His voice, as always, was devoid of emotion. Report received, Echo Squad. Threat neutralized. Artifact, Jinn's Heart, will be studied by our specialists. Information obtained from Professor Armitage and the diary is being analyzed. The hungry activity in the Central Asian region has sharply decreased. Excellent work. And that was it. Not a word about our wounds, about the risk, about the fact that we had almost died. We were tools, effective, but just tools. I returned to my sterile cubicle in the shelter, placed the silver sword on the table. It was cold again, its inner light extinguished. I went to the mirror. The tired face of Aiden Barclay looked back at me, but the eyes were different. The yellow spark of the beast still burned in them, but now there was not only fury and hunger, there was a shadow of a pack, the shadow of those who fought beside me, the shadow of those I was ready to die for, and who were ready to die for me. The war wasn't over. The hungry would lie low, but they wouldn't disappear. Ancient horrors still slept in the depths of the earth, waiting for their hour. And we, Echo Squad, would go on the hunt again. Because that is our job, our destiny, our scar of the moon. But now I knew I was not alone. And perhaps that was the only thing that mattered.